sí. Muchas gracias. Bueno, buenos días a todos. Bienvenidos a esta sesión. Si algunos están todavía entrando, ¿no? Creo que ya estamos en la sala y tenemos a nuestros invitados en línea. Vamos a empezar con una rigurosa puntualidad porque tenemos muchas sesiones. Esta es la primerísima sesión que tenemos en esta conferencia internacional, muchas gracias, del Día Internacional de la Libertad de Prensa. Así que vamos a iniciar nosotros, tenemos el placer de empezar el programa, estrenarlo esta mañana junto con ustedes, con esta sesión que lleva por título Hacia una ley modelo de protección a periodistas y personas trabajadoras de la prensa en América Latina y el Caribe. Me voy a expresar en español, pero sepan que hay interpretación para también los que están.
Yes, I will speak Spanish, but yes, do know that some of you who are joining us from the Caribbean, there will be simultaneous interpretation into English and into Portuguese. I would like, by thanking you and thanking the Correspondence Society of Latin America and the Caribbean, SOPOLAC, for the organization and leadership they had taken in this, the organization of this meeting. And I would like to thank the regional UNESCO office in Uruguay. I would like to especially greet and thank the President, Mauricio Boubel, that is here with us, and the Executive Director, Professor Ricardo Rivas, because of the constant dialogue they have encouraged in the topic and the promotion of conversations in the situations we know. Here you can see the speakers. And we all know and understand the issue of journalist security in the region. As you very well know, we have to do more and more urgently because journalists are falling or being attacked every week. Even in the region, we've heard from Chile some news about this. I'm not going to tell you figures or data about murders. You know that. You can take it from the global trends that the UNESCO publishes every year in their statistics. But there has been a slight decrease, even though there has been a slight decrease in the murder of journalists worldwide, we can see that the figures continue to remain strong in our region, and we still have the highest murder rate in the region, and there is impunity about these crimes. Journalists are murdered and they're also silenced. There have been kidnappings, silenced journalists' imprisonments. And we have seen how the security has measures have lowered and how violence has increased. Sometimes psychological and sometimes physical violence, of course, leading to the biggest form of violence, that is murder. We know that women have been especially affected. 1 out of every 4 women have experienced threats or physical violence, and up to 73 of them have experienced online violence. So clearly, these figures are shocking. Another topic is the issue of our conference, that is Journalism Under Digital Siege. And that shows that there has been increasing violence, online harassment, hacking, and we have seen how states are using different types of tactics to have access to confidential information and to intimidate journalists. We have to do more We have to continue to carry out the 3 Ps of the United Nations for journalist security and impunity. The 3 Ps are prevention, protection, and justice. And the session that will come after our session at 11 will speak of the challenges that we have forward, and of course you're all invited to stay to that meeting. Besides this introduction that I know is not very happy, we still know that a lot is being done. The media, the civil society, and the governments are doing much to find the right solutions that we will talk about. This we will debate. Our speakers will talk about that, especially about an initiative that comes from journalists' associations. That is a proposal for a legal framework for journalist security, and that could mean significant support for governments that are considering to take more specific legislative measures and public initiatives and policies. So from the UNESCO, when they introduced this initiative, we considered that this was a step forward, that we had to use the work that had been carried out to bring it to the countries that needed it in order for them to have this useful tool on the road towards efficient and effective decisions. I would like to thank the Vice President of the PDC program of UNESCO. This is the program for the development of communication. It's an intergovernmental program to speak of these issues, and I would like to thank you for your interests and follow up on the issue of journalist security so that you can continue to support this tool and the member states. I will now give the floor to the chair, Ricardo Rivas, Executive Director of Socolaj, that will be introducing the speakers. Thank you.
Hola.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rosa, for your presentation. Thank you for attending. We value your presence. In this first meeting, we will share the table with the Chilean representative, Natalie. She's a colleague. She's a former president of the Chilean Journalist Association, and she started to work in order for this project to be entered into Parliament. We also have Alejandra Negrete from OAS. She's a specialist in violence issues in journalism. We also have Javier Bernabé Frauer. He is a professor at the Plutense University of Madrid. And then we have Pepe Costa that will be hosting and chairing the meeting. We were talking about the UN plan for journalist security and impunity that came as an issue in 2012. In 2013, we were in San Jose in Costa Rica with the topic of the action plan. And at that time, when we were talking about freedom of press, we were talking about speaking freely. We were happy. We clapped. We were very happy. 10 years later, we can say that Yeah, we have the right to be happy, but the plan of action recommended to the member states to be adapted and localized to the local realities, and very few of the mandatories took that advice. So that is clear to say that that we are very happy today to introduce to you our security law for journalists and workers of the media, where besides security, we are proposing a wider framework. The action plan was very good, but now we are proposing this legislation so that we can not only considers journalists and workers of the media, but also everyone else, the environments, the families. And the Inter-American Court of Justice supported us with the Ginette Beoja Lima case versus Colombia. And in that verdict that was historical, I ask you to please go and read it, where they forced Colombia to create a permanent fund to deal with female being attacked that are always stronger than attacks to men. Besides that, and we don't have this in the legislation, I think that it's time for journalists and communicators to accept that we are part of a risk group, that we are a vulnerable group. And within that framework, to be able to demand the necessary legislation that we need to work. Probably in our next meeting, we will have to come with somebody from the International Labor Organization. And this is an example. Imagine that you have a worker that has to clean the glass from the outside of a building, needs certain standards and requirements. We should have similar demands when we have to attend environments that are dangerous, and we see this on a regular basis. Sometimes we have many of our colleagues that don't have life vests or helmets or any other protection gear that is essential if we need to start working on security. Thank you for joining us. Nati, you have the floor. Nati, you have 5 minutes. I see. Thank you, Ricardo. I will try to respect the time I have, and thank you all for being here as the representative of the Republic of Chile, and also as a journalist and of the president of the National Association of Journalists of Chile. That is an institution that has much to do with the topics that we are going to be dealing with today. That is this the draft, this model draft being introduced in Congress. I would like to introduce to you this initiative from Congress. I also represent the Institute of Communication, Art, and Culture from Chile. So I hereby represent the communicators in Chile. And I would like to tell you briefly the history On October 18th, 2019, the Chilean society was affected by some events that resulted from the neoliberal policies set by the Pinochet regime. And we, that night, created this proposal. We created a new proposal for the Chilean society that were expressed in all our territory, that was brought to the national agenda, that is the issue of inequality in our country. And as days went by, we had a state of siege and curfews that also affected the media and the journalists in the state that was led by President Piñera, that also has pending lawsuits about this topic. So at that time, some journalists and workers of the media received violence during the first few months of the social unrest of October 2018, and where we saw that 17 journalists received violence, were attacked, camera people and international press workers were attacked as well. The greatest number of abuse took place from the national police through different types of attack, especially to the journalists when they were trying to move freely on the territory. There was even a report for sexual violence in October 2019 in the city of Arica in the north of Chile. And there was also another organization that monitors freedom of press, that about the situation in 2019 that changed our country. This institution recorded over 300 attacks by the state agents to journalists. Only 60 of them started some kind of legal report, and only 3 of them came to a verdict in terms of the public recognition of these type of aggressions or attacks to people, to workers of the media. We also have to add other vulnerabilities that are as serious in the sense of the popular unrest or riots that took place, and attacks by military forces of the government to communication media editors and controllers of communication media about the contents that they were including in their programs, and also attacks to investigative reports from journalists. Of course, we have to consider these vulnerabilities under the light of the freedom of press and the strengthening of democracy. And this is why our verdict is clear. We think that in Chile, democracy is at risk. We have agreed in including legislative constraints to what is happening in Chile. This was subscribed by the Inter-American Rapporteur that describes attacks, intimidations against journalists and media for the social unrest and censorship. We're talking about these interventions that took place to communication media and criminal mechanisms to these critical actions. Under this framework, we would like to tell you that it is urgent that Chile promotes security to the journalists and the workers of the media in order to guarantee the freedom of press and the democratic governance. And in this respect, we would like to say that our draft law It is an adaptation of the journalist law that was discussed here earlier, and that was led by Ricardo Rivas, with whom we have met regularly to make progress about this legislation, and that has the purpose of guaranteeing and safeguarding the exercise of those who communicate with a gender focus. As you said earlier, women are more affected and sexual differences have a role. And we hope to enter this project, this draft law in May, that is the month of the press, to be able to generate comprehensive support so that this draft law can become legislation in the state of Chile. We hope that we can make progress and start the Chilean regulation in terms of what we have received about this network that we have already started to build. Do I have another minute? Yes. I would just to leave you one campaign that has to do with the vulnerability of the journalist rights, that is called To Inform is Not a Crime. And this is within the context of the vulnerability of journalist rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. How nasty to tell you not to speak, but it is my job, and I am decided to do it. My friend Negrete, thank you very much. As Rosa said, we cannot deny that there have been important advances in the protection of journalists in the region, such as the elimination of some rules to criminalize expression, the creation of laws and protection of journalists, laws for the protection of personal data that were structural. Nevertheless, several of them were lost in implementations or were overcome by reality, and in general terms, they have not strengthened the exercise of this right in terms of democracy or free exercise of journalism, or have avoided aggressions to journalists, silencing journalists. I read something painful yesterday from Mexico. She felt a gun in her head every time she wrote. That's why she abandoned journalism, and her family became displaced, limiting their life projects. The extension of this problem in different countries suggests that violence against journalists is not the result of isolated actions, but deliberate strategies that mean to weaken press as an accountability mechanism. It happens more frequently in places where public officers are not aware of the importance of journalists, or where the state structures live together with violence, corruption, and organized crime, narco traffic, social armed conflict, violation of human rights, social protest, and generalized impunity. In this framework, violence and polarization is a social control mechanism used by state agents with illegal interest, or state or parastate actors against the state and its legality paradigm. It is obvious that states have to reinforce measures to protect journalists, who may not be solved only with the creation of a law for the protection without comprehensive strategies, of which I would like to point out the following. First one is that we cannot think that there is a uniform solution to the threats to press, because although there is a common interest to silence, but the contexts are different, and each diversity requires a specific focalized response. It's not the same when a journalist lives in a place that silenced by organized crime, or the one related to extreme weather, pandemia. It's not the same to have officers who consider journalists as enemies, or in indigenous areas with economic interest on a certain area, or to have a woman covering a protest they would suffer sexual violence, or a person who is indigenous or has a disability. The law has to cover these peculiarities and have specialized protocols for the different contexts of journalism and for journalists in all their diversity, always including an intersectional gender approach in each of these realities. We must have a clear diagnosis on how to live the exercise of journalism in each region, and only through this comprehensive knowledge of the context can we define the different strategies and focalized protocols to prevent and protect effectively. Besides allowing the state to know how to act in each case, if updated, it would prevent cases through the creation of alerts and heat maps, knowing the strategies to threaten journalists. This also leads to the need for an analysis of context as an a priori obligation of states to understand the individual cases in wider frameworks and to interconnect them so as to know the structural causes, to develop more efficient responses and accountability, and to generate measures for protection and prevention. To this, we add the premise that journalists are subjects of rights and not of protection, so that all our diversity must be present in discussions on the laws and their implementation, and to consider the differential impacts of each of them on gender and intersectionalities. Also, these comprehensive laws must foresee the whole spectrum up to sanctions throughout the whole political spectrum. So the authorities in charge of this and an official system must bring them together by law from the highest echelon to make decisions, and that this may be replicated locally. On the other side, together with laws, all the laws that criminalize illegitimately expressions, those that have short time for prescriptions, or the ones that are too complex, that require a very difficult proof, or the ones that put other data sources at risk. There must be exemplary punishments against those who threaten journalists, and there should be an idea of aggravation of this assaults to journalists and to female journalists, harassment, sexual violence, psychological, verbal, and hate speech because of gender. On this same issue, we must ensure that new technologies have a gender approach in their creation and application, and how we relate to them, that the request for personal data and how to access internet and telephones are in agreement with or in accordance with international standards, and that they are not gender biased, and that it is also important to give journalists the adequate tools for their self-protection that would decrease their level of exposure. Journalists, companies, and professional associations must create capacity among their members, generate resources, and consider the risks and coverage. As we know, journalists are always subject to threats, pressure, poor working conditions, and bad access to social security. So besides good salary, they need and deserve spaces for self-care that must be understood as a public policy. The spaces range from emotional comfort and safe spaces to manifest what they live and exchange experiences, to flexible working conditions to allow their family and working life. Alexandra, my friend Javier really wants to speak. Well, I will not go deeper into this because time is over, but it is very important to decrease the impunity of crimes against journalists, because we know that this is only breeding ground for journalists to be silenced and democracies to be weakened. Thank you, Alejandra. I must tell you that you owe Javier 3 minutes. Javier, well, thank you very much to the moderator. Well, I want to draw a very brief conclusion after having analyzed the project of law, and I do it from two spaces: academic, because I'm a professor at the Complutense in Madrid, and professional, because I'm also a journalist. And among other spaces, I have covered different armed conflicts. I believe that this project is of enough quality, and that is why I am here proposing or suggesting to the air, or perhaps to myself, that we give multiple support so that this project becomes a project for the European Union. I think it is very well elaborated. It is detailed and goes into all the spaces that as journalists need to exercise our profession in a protective way. So I make this bridge between Latin America and the European Union because I think it can be applied. We need a multiple support for this application. I also here call upon UNESCO because, well, you have invited us, so I think we can do it. Multiple support for the application and the member states of the European Union that would have three levels, probably. One, submission, and the Parliament and Commission from a political group or an independent group. And here again, I request the support to the Member of Parliament who is sitting here with us. Second, submission to different parliaments, different commissions, different spaces. They need to be plenaries where it can be submitted and generate spaces for debate. And then submission to the public opinion, and then it is easier because we can work from the media and social networks. For this, we have to respond to the question, is this necessary in Europe nowadays? Well, I believe it is necessary in Europe more than in other historical times. Right now in Europe, journalists are more protected than in Latin America, of course, but they are not completely protected. We all know this thing, but I'm going to say we are at war. We are at war. I would leave 2 seconds of my time to generate that empty space. It sounds crazy. It's easy to say, but we are at war in Europe. It's absolutely crazy what we are living. We again have journalists murdered, jailed because they are considered spies, and spied upon. We have new generations of journalists who are covering armed conflicts without protection, without job protection, without physical protection of vests and helmets as collaborators of media, without contracts. And with those contracts, they would have been covered with protection. Of course, the answer to this question is, of course, in the European Union, we need something similar to this project of law. And on the other hand, we are in a process, and I have been working on development cooperation and human rights for many, many years, since 92, 93. It's really something that I like to say because I have always participated in processes of North-South cooperation that I didn't really believe in, with many failures. I have participated in South-South collaborations, and it is very interesting. This would be the first historical case, at least as far as I know, of a South-North collaboration for the development and human rights, and the possible application of this project of law in a northern space in the European Union. From here, I will finish by proposing to our colleagues from UNESCO as authorities a concrete measure, tangible one, that would be the creation of an aid fund for materials that are necessary for coverage in armed conflicts, necessary for covering armed conflicts for colleagues who are journalists from multiple nationalities. We are talking about many countries, African countries, who are sending journalists to cover this war without protection, many Asian countries that are sending journalists to cover the war without protection. And at this table, I must say that we are talking about hundreds of Latin American journalists who are covering armed conflicts throughout the world without protection. It's a minimal protection. It might seem silly, but we have to start somewhere, from the place. I would like to thank the organization for having invited me and for being able to share this table with you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Javier. Thank you very much. Know what's coming. Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you. Opportunities to advance ad, because journalism cannot be free and independent if it is not safe. That is our main challenge. Paraguay, during the Stroessner dictatorship, in a university, the Catholic University, many meetings were held, many protests were held, debates against the dictatorship. And the president of the political committee of the neighborhood where the university was located used to say that he would go every so often to hit with sticks and with mobs the people who were going to debate, and called himself, or self-appointed himself, the moderator of the Catholic University. Censorship was his moderation. Without reaching those levels of censorship, I would like to invite the panel members who are here with us: Ángela Erpel, coordinator of the Democracy and Human Rights Heinrich Böll Foundation; Mauricio Weibel, who's president of the Society of Correspondents in Latin America and the Caribbean, and also a member today of the jury of the UNESCO, Guillermo Cano, Press, Freedom Press, and Pablo Medina, Vice Chair of the International Program for Communications Development in UNESCO, who has supported many of these projects in UNESCO and worldwide, of course, to talk about this problem. 1,200 journalists murdered in the past 10 years are the figures provided by UNESCO, and in the Latin American region, in particular, the largest figure murdered in peace times. Why so? Because to a large degree, the states are not preventing, protecting, and providing justice on these crimes. There is impunity, but in the basis of this lies the fragility of our states. Most crimes against journalists occur in states that are fragile or failed because of organized crime, narco traffic. We lived in Mexico, Colombia, and Paraguay. Now we have just finished with UNESCO support an observatory of violence against journalists that covers the past 30 years. Over 300 cases of attacks and threats, and 19 journalists murdered during that transitional democratic period, but with a state that cannot really stand its ground against organized crime. So I introduce now Ángela Erpel Jara to tell us in 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you. Here I am speaking on behalf of the Heinrich Böll Foundation. We are a foundation that is closely related to the Green Party in Germany. We are part of an international network in projects in around 60 countries, for which we have approximately 62 million euros per year in public funds. This is the cooperation that we also have in several countries in the world. The foundation is guided by ecology, democracy, solidarity, and nonviolence as values. It is particularly interested in the relationship of a society where democratic exchanges occur and gender democracy as a relationship between sexes that is free of dependence and domination. Regarding support to journalists and information communication workers, we have been working regionally in the Latin American offices, and particularly the Central American offices, which is a regional office with El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Guatemala, and Costa Rica, and the Colombian office, plus the Southern Cone office that I represent, which is Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. With these offices, we are currently working to support a framework law of the protection to journalists and communication workers, of which I will not go deeper because we have heard a lot about it already. But most of all, the cooperation projects we have carried out in Central America, for instance, we have joint projects of support to institutions such as the digital journal El Faro and Envío from Nicaragua, which are also support to journalists as far as they are representatives of human rights defenders, which is fundamentally what the foundation supports. The human rights defenders in ecology, in feminism, and communications, because of the risks that we have discussed in this panel. The Colombian office is currently supporting this regional journalist protection mechanism, and we can also see that the framework law for journalist protection appears in a paper that's called Green Ideas. You have some physical booklets there, and you can also download it from the Foundation's webpage. The Southern Cone office has a line of work with communicators, particularly in Chile and Argentina. Some important projects that the Foundation has supported are, for instance, the one related to the College of Journalists in Chile that had a cooperation from 2017 to 2020 with projects of political incidents guiding to the guarantee of the right to communication in the new constitution way before the current process in Chile. And it meant to break the sexist communication patterns present in local media. For that, meetings and workshops and campaigns were made. Alliances with social organizations and territorial organizations and university and media were made in order to advance in the defense of the right to communication and the non-reproduction of symbolic violence through different actions with incidents in different social spaces. Important advance was also the information gathered in the Committee of Systematization of the Constituent Process, which informed that local self-called and provincial meetings considered freedom of expression in the 8th place in rights mentioned and 7th when individuals were consulted. This shows the concern of citizens for this guarantee, and we should take note of the evolution of this political right, looking for new efficient ways to guarantee it, trying to reach not only its individual dimension, but also its collective dimension.
We have also supported in 2020 different independent communication projects, such as CIPER, that Mauricio can also talk about this. And we have also supported the participation of several meetings in the Caribbean and Latin America for the protection of journalists and communicators that took place in Uruguay last November. That also had the collaboration of UNESCO and the Latin American School of Journalists. Also in communication, in the area of communication, we have the project in Argentina and Brazil that deal with the hate speech and activism in the region, especially with a focus on women. And also we have supported the Via Libre Foundation in terms of human rights, AI, and human rights, that also tries to deal with the ethical constraints and limitations of technology. So the security of journalists cannot be an individual concern or of any specific state. It should be a global concern that has to do with the management of human matters in the global society.
Aplaudir más largo. Bueno.
Okay, now let's give the floor to Mauricio Bagel. Mauricio, you have the floor. I would like to thank UNESCO for making this project possible, opening the World Day. I will speak as an investigative reporter and as an activist for freedom of speech. We see how today freedom of speech is the most relevant human right after life, because through freedom of speech we can guarantee the other human rights. And considering what we see in the world with weak democracies, we see different attacks to freedom of speech and to journalists around the world. This project started originally from a personal and collective reflection. Some investigative reporters, we have had to face different situations. I had several attacks, including yesterday, where my office was attacked. I was spied upon. I was attacked. And within this framework of my personal history, that is also the history of all journalists, it's a situation that happens commonly in Mexico, Colombia, Central America, and we start and we discuss then what should we do? That is, besides stating that this is unacceptable, what can we do? We need to take some action. And then we said, okay, let's respond with let's provide a civilized response to these barbaric attacks. And this is what led to the fact that we decided to include the rule of law in our demands. And then we came up with the concept of protection. And there are no protection laws for journalists or workers of the media. So this is why we decided to be able to articulate a response that would agree with international standards. We worked with a human rights expert, with the V Foundation. We invited legal experts, the present rapporteur. We received training about jurisprudence, and we articulated the proposal model law of global protection for journalists. And we decided to move fast and implement that into local projects. We worked on that. We worked with Representative Castillo as a journalist and as a representative. We worked with Adriana, the lawyer, as well, and we were able to articulate the proposal for Chile. So we took the general model law for UNESCO and for the different countries, and we took it for Chile. That proposal is already set and devised. We talked with all the parties. We try to have as much inclusivity and include every project in a cross-cutting way throughout the project. So I have an additional minute. I will give it to Paraguay, because Ricardo Rivas also carried out this proposal with the Inter-American Committee of Human Rights. So this I will take less time than I should, and I would like to finish by asking you support to be able to face these situations and be able to articulate and build the defense of freedom of speech that would enable us to stop the crimes that we see in Chile and in Latin America and in Europe, in Africa and Asia don't happen again. Thank you. Thank you, Mauricio. I just remind what you said, that is to combat these barbaric acts with civilized responses. You have 5 minutes then. Thank you. Don Pepe. I'm sorry that I haven't called you Don Pepe, but we need to keep our standards. I would like to thank UNESCO and Uruguay for hosting us. And it is an honor for me to be here learning from you. I would like to be as brief as you were, because I'm the last speaker of all, and I have to be able to move these comments that you have made and even questions and answers to the area of the member states. As you know, PIDC is an intergovernment UNESCO program of the communication sector, and it is the only multilateral UN forum that has the purpose of mobilizing the international community to debate and ensure that there is progress made in terms of communication or information, and I have the role of transferring all of these debates to the member states. And as a vice president, I must bring it to as many areas as possible and socialize them with the other 36 members, and to provide a universal face of all the member states of the organization. I had created my intervention here, including all the challenges and opportunities that the journalists have. But I will summarize that because you have already spoken about that. And I will try to focus on the opportunity that we have in terms of passing this draft law of protection to journalists and workers of the media. I would say that this is a tool that will be used in addition to those that we have internationally. We have the universal examination for journalists. We have the rapporteur mechanisms that we used in a cross-cutting way through the community. And we also have multilateral actions in the system. So I think that this draft law really matches the projects we already have in the States. And this could be a valuable tool if we consider that we should have free, independent journalism. It is an essential right. Freedom of speech is an essential right. And we should all be on the same page about this. I think that this law will help us perfect the state systems that we already have and will provide guarantees for journalists and workers of the media. Distinguished Pepe, I will finish my participation here. And if you have questions, of course, I would be happy to answer them from the perspective of state representation of the Caribbean and Latin America. But of course that I know this could be used and extrapolated to any country globally, to all the regions. Thank you. Thank you, Pablo. We have 1 minute. I don't know, Ricardo would like to have 30 minutes to close, because then we have to move on to another meeting. Thank you, Rosa. I would like to say something that I already said that has to do with the historical verdict of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. I would like to thank you, Ricardo Pérez Manrique, President of the Court, and to Saavedra, Secretary of the Court, for the efforts that you have made to interpret the law and put our collective in a situation of defense and possibilities. Thank you so much. So, Rosa, would you like to close? Yes, okay. Thank you all. You have been very respectful with time. Congratulations. Too bad we don't have more time, but this is how these conferences go. Those of you who participated through the chat would like to tell you that we have received all your questions, and they will be passed on to the speakers, and you will receive your answers. So this is the end of our presentation. I would like you to please leave this room so we can continue with the next table of discussions and ask the next presenters to take their seats. Thank you. Good morning.